If you manage to buy Bitcoin before the US government starts buying Bitcoin, that's fantastic. And you will be much better off in the long run. You'll still be okay if you start buying after, but you'll be a lot more okay if you start buying before. That's a long, roundabout way of saying toxic maximalists are toxic because we care.
Greetings and salutations, my fellow plebs. This is the Culture Bit. The Bitcoin time chain is currently at 887480. And the value of one Bitcoin is still one Bitcoin. Sorry for the shitty impersonation there.
I loved it. I've been debating ripping that part out of the episode because I'm like, do people just skip over it? You know, like, is it too much? They just want to get into the episode. But then I'm like, do I really care? They can skip it if they want. And if not, like, how are they going to know that the value of one Bitcoin is still one Bitcoin if I don't tell them? You know, they may forget. I'd hate for that to happen.
No, you got to keep it in there. You can't take it out. For my guests who may not be familiar with Walker America, he's a pivotal Bitcoin maxi, host of the Bitcoin, or as some may call it, the Titcoin podcast.
It's true.
He's one of our killer MCs at the Bitcoin conference, along with his wife, Carla. My brother's got a voice like
my much better half. I was just I got to get that on camera, you know.
A good man, smart man. Dude's got a voice that could wake up a coma patient. Walker, you and I recently met, finally, hard to believe, at Sailor's 100K NYE event earlier this January, which was a ton of fun. Happy to chat about that.
That was a trip.
Before we get into that, how you doing?
Man, I'm doing great. It's great to be here. As you said, yeah, I couldn't believe that was like the first time we'd actually met. And what a place and time and moment to meet. If you told Walker a few years ago that he'd be, ringing in the new year with a bunch of super toxic maxis at Michael Saylor's 100K Bitcoin New Year's Eve party. First off, I would have been like, who's Michael Saylor? Because a few years ago, before he got into Bitcoin, I didn't know. So there you go. Life's strange, but it's a beautiful journey.
Dude, it was funny when I came up to you. You were at the bar. I was at the bar. It was late in the night. We had a couple of drinks. Things were pretty loose.
Maybe more than
Bitcoiners
a couple.
being Bitcoiners, right? And I'm like, oh, Walker, hey, nice to meet you. Formalities, whatever. And I had known you, originally come across you through emceeing our events and then your podcast. You've got a pretty big voice in the Bitcoiner community, not just on Twitter, but also on Nostr. And so we got to talking, and I always ask the question, I'm like, hey, when did you get into Bitcoin, right? Because it's like one of the staple Bitcoiner questions. And you were like, I think you said 2020 or something along those lines. And I remember just being like, actually kind of surprised, because I had assumed you had been in Bitcoin much longer. But walk me through that. Walk me through your journey. How did Walker find Bitcoin, and why are you podcasting now?
Well, to answer the last part first, I think every Bitcoiner eventually becomes a podcaster. It's just a matter of time, unless you're a developer and you're doing something that's actually more useful. But the rest of us, if you can't code, podcast, as they say. But I got into Bitcoin, started dipping my toes in 2020. I am not some like 2015, 2013 OG. I heard about Bitcoin in the Silk Road days, ignored it, told my nerd friend I don't care about his Bitcoins that he's telling me about, so ignored it then. Then 2017 came around and I heard about Bitcoin again because things were mooning. And I was like, well, I can't afford a whole Bitcoin, so I'll just buy 2 of these Litecoin things. And that was silly of me. I literally had done exactly zero research beyond seeing headlines. So I have a lot of empathy for people who are in that same position still now. A lot more information out there now, but still you can find yourself in that position. And then 2020 rolled around and the government was printing money and shutting everyone down. And I started kind of realizing, like something is really broken here. I need to look back into that Bitcoin thing. I seem to remember something about like absolute scarcity, like one of the things that stuck in my head. Started going down that rabbit hole. And from there, it was like, oh, wow, this is something completely different than I thought it was when I ignored it before. I need to dedicate a lot more time to this. And luckily during, COVID, we had a lot more time to dedicate, let's say. And I think a lot of people went down that path kind of as a result of or in tandem with those lockdowns. So I guess thanks, Daddy Government, for locking us in our houses.
Would you say, to ask the meme, what radicalized you, Walker? Would you say it was COVID, or were you always kind of like a self-sovereign, libertarian-minded individual pre-COVID days?
No, like if I'm being totally honest, no, I really was not. I mean, I think it like a lot of people, you think that you are a free thinker, especially when you're not actually one, because it's like it's like this kind of self awareness Dunning Kruger. Like you think you know more about yourself than you actually know. You think you know more about how the world works when you really have a small glimpse of what's going on, but that's all you know. And so, yeah, I was not especially radical. I mean, I was kind of trapped in just I worked at a big consulting firm for a while, worked for some, various larger companies. And I don't know, I was just like, things were fine. Things were going, pretty well. I was paid well. I didn't really, bat too much of an eyelash at many things going on. I'd say COVID is what really started to wake me up. And I think a lot of it was like Carla and I, we moved into like the middle of nowhere, Wisconsin. I'm from Wisconsin originally, so that was nice. But we had a lot more time. We started raising chickens and growing a garden and doing other random COVID lockdown stuff, just spending a lot of time outside. And the time that wasn't spent outside, it was like, okay, let me read, let me research, let me spend maybe too much time online as well. And you just start to realize that like nothing that the government's doing is making any sense at all. And didn't consider myself really political before that either. Still don't consider myself partisan, but I think it's impossible not to be political, is what I've kind of realized. It's like, what's the old quote? You may not care about politics, but politics cares about you. And so it's like there are certain things that you must pay attention to, at least to be aware of how it's going to affect you and your family and your future. And so COVID was one of those things where it was like, this is nuts. Uh, Even somebody like I'm not an economist, but even I can understand that printing a bunch of money and sending it out in checks to people and all these paycheck protection loans and everything else, where's that money going to go? What's it like? Is it going to have no effect? It all seemed fairly obvious. And then after like reading a lot of books by great Bitcoiners, reading a lot of Austrian economics, which I really had not looked into at all prior to that, that just continued the radicalization process. And yeah, Bitcoin was kind of let's say, the guiding light through that process, the thing that everything else sort of centered around. And now here I am with a podcast. So, get
No,
radicalized, start a Bitcoin podcast, do a bunch of stuff in the middle. But those are basically the two key points, I think, in any Bitcoiner's journey: radicalization, podcast.
I think your journey resonates with a lot of other Bitcoiners out there. I uh, I originally got into Bitcoin myself back in, I want to say it was like 2016, 2017. Had heard about it in 2014 through Silk Road, and through my college roommate at that time. Was doing a lot of shit coining leading up to 2020. It wasn't really until 2020 that I was like, hey, what is sound money? What is Austrian economics? Who's the safeting guy? Why is everyone telling me to read the Bitcoin standard? And so similar to you, had a lot of time at home. I was a new father at that time. So like I went from my wife and I having fun, going out, staying up late, to, caring about this bundle of joy and being like, oh my God, I need to be thinking about like college tuition, making sure he's in a good school, ensuring he's in like extracurricular so that he's a productive member of society. And I'm like, I need to make more money. How do I make more money? So I went down that rabbit hole myself, and came to a lot of similar conclusions that you just laid out. I think one of the things that resonated with me there was that your comment about politics not caring about you, or politics cares about you even if you don't care about
Yeah.
politics. And as it pertains to Bitcoin, I've always said that Bitcoin is the most apolitical political asset that has ever existed in man. Because ultimately, what is it? It's money, and money is power at the end of the day. So now we're in this weird age, it's 2025. We've got Bitcoin in the White House. And all of us Bitcoiners who have entered in since then, being in this community of Reddit to X to Noster, putting on laser eyes and sharing these Pepe Frog memes are now sitting with seats at the White House, commentating on the dynamics of how society should be functioning, and people are actually listening to us. And obviously, Walker, you've, I'm sure, orange pilled a fair share of politicians. Um, whether or not you realize it or not, I'm sure a lot of people have come across some episodes. But yeah, walk me through post 2020. So you and Carla are kind of this dynamic couple, this dynamic duo in Bitcoin. I think that story in and of itself resonates very well with a lot of Bitcoiners. What was that journey like for you and your wife?
Yeah, so we'd started a startup during COVID, like a hardware software startup, and had a pretty great idea out there, and we're super stoked about it. And conveniently, actually, the all of the companies like marketing materials were orange themed, so we that worked out later for the whole Bitcoin thing. Had a lot of orange lying around, but we ran into some supply chain issues trying to source microprocessors and could not get them. The startup kind of went on hold. We'd been lurking on Bitcoin Twitter for a while at that point. I mean, since, maybe mid 2020, just been kind of starting to follow some people in the Bitcoin space as we were going down this rabbit hole journey, as people do. And we were sitting on the couch one night. This would have been like May 2021. It was right after that first kind of below, like when we started going down in 2021 off those highs. We were looking around and like the sentiment had gone from like everybody's bullish, we're going up forever, to this, what's happening, we're crashing, everything sucks. And we're like, man, everybody is like so bummed, they're taking everything so seriously. What if we just kind of made like a short skit and just made fun of like all the types of, like Bitcoin haters, basically, that just don't get Bitcoin, because whenever the price is going down, all the trolls come out, right? And so we did that. We were initially just posting to TikTok, but that first video went pretty viral. Like, I mean, few 100,000 views, maybe more. Like, it blew up, and we were like, okay, like this resonated with people. People seem like we struck a nerve in a good way somehow. Maybe we should make another. Continued kind of doing that for a little while, and the videos just like kept blowing up. And so we were at this point where, startup had kind of was necessarily put on pause. And we said, well, let's just like focus a little bit more time on this. Like, people are liking it. We have no plan for like monetizing this or doing anything like that, but people seem to be enjoying it. It seems like people could use a laugh right now. Let's not take ourselves so seriously. Let's, enjoy this ride that we're on, as crazy as it might be, and remind people why we're here, and make fun of all the trolls along the way, obviously. So kept doing that. Got on Bitcoin Twitter as well, like, or stopped lurking, I should say, on Bitcoin Twitter. Started blowing up there, pretty big as well, like starting from a fresh account. And before we know it, like, I'll never forget, Tone Vase asked us to come and MC the Scammy Awards in Las Vegas at Unconfiscatable. And I always loved Tone for that, because at that point we were still pretty small, relatively unknown. But he had us come and do it. I like dressed up in a full metal, like suit of armor, knight helmet, to kind of go into this character of Toximus Maximus. Carla's wearing her orange wig, and just met like a ton of people at Unconfiscatable that we still are close friends in the industry with to today. We had a conjoining room with Greg Foss, and I knew who he was. And I recognized his voice literally through like the thin walls in the Las Vegas hotel. And I remember just being like, Carl, I think we're like next to Greg Foss. And like, he's talking very loudly on the phone right now. Like, hope we get to, meet him later. But yeah, that just kind of kicked us off even more. And then that snowballed into, all of a sudden, we're emceeing the Bitcoin conference. We've emceed a good number of them now, from Lugano, Plan B to El Salvador, a couple of conferences now, and I'm probably missing a couple in there too. But it's a wild ride. And it's just I think it's a good example of like you can just do things. Like you see people are being all salty and bearish. You can just go make funny videos that make fun of those salty bearish people, but also lift them up in a way, make them laugh at themselves. You can do whatever you want. And in Bitcoin, it's like nobody can stop you from doing that. You can just become a cultural influence and try to drive the narrative a little bit yourself. Whether or not people listen is a different story, but nobody can stop you from trying. There's no gatekeepers, and I think that's kind of a beautiful thing.
You played out the sovereign individual thesis. You and Carla together, essentially. You can just do things.
You can just
No,
do
that's
them.
100% true. I gotta ask though, you have a very deep radio voice. Have you done this in the past? You have a background in public speaking, emceeing. How was it? Nervous the first time getting up on stage? Like, walk me through
You,
that. Like, how did this opportunity come about?
no background in it. I don't think I even knew that I had like a decent voice for this kind of thing. And I'd been told like by coworkers before. Like, I remember I was working at a General Electric for a little while, and I remember one of my like Southern coworkers was like, this was down in Louisville, Kentucky, at Appliance Park. And she's like, Walker, you just have such a sweet voice. It just makes me relaxed whenever I hear it. And I'm like, oh, that's nice of you to say, Tina, or and but that's that's all I really knew of that. I'm an engineer by education. I didn't really have a ton of time for other things. So for me, it was like this was just I don't know. I've always been I guess, enjoyed character voices, but never in any sort of professional capacity. And for Carla and I together, it was like she actually is like a classically trained singer and has done a lot in the theater, at least when she was younger. So she's like the real talent. I'm just kind of here providing some comedic effect. But yeah, again, great example of you don't have to have a background or an education in something. If you want to do something, try and study it a little bit, learn it. But the most important thing is just to literally start doing it. You don't have to plan a whole lot. You can you can just start making skits. You can just start a podcast. Like especially now, you can just go and pick up some of these mics on Amazon and have them delivered tomorrow, and you're good to go. Get yourself a little camera and start talking to it, and maybe people listen. But
Maybe
I don't
they'll
know if
listen.
that answers the question. But yeah, it's no background. Just I guess just blessed with some vocal cords that vibrate in a particularly enjoyable way. Although some
Well,
people are like, you do a Batman voice. I don't like it. I'm like, trust me, this is my default voice. Like if I wanted to do a Batman voice, it would be like this. Like that's a completely different voice, guys. Come on. Like this is ridiculous.
I couldn't notice the difference there, to be honest. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, here we go.
No, the reason I ask, right? You mentioned this earlier, the Dunning-Kruger effect, where stage one, you think you know everything, and then slowly you realize you know nothing, and then you start to question yourself. Maybe some imposter syndrome starts to seep in, and you kind of like leapfrogged a lot of things. So you weren't an OG, you come in class in 2020, you start making this video, it blows up. All of a sudden, Tone Bay's like, hey, come MC my event. You and your wife go do this thing with no background or professional experience doing it. And then you mention you see Greg Foss, which is funny. I guess in any other Bitcoiners world, like now, people who aren't in podcasting or media or are attending these events on a regular basis, that first time meeting a Bitcoiner that is really exciting. But that novelty starts to wear off a little bit down the road, right? So walk me through that first time. And I don't think you had started your podcast just yet either, correct?
You're exactly right. I didn't start the podcast until I guess it's been like almost 18 months now on the podcast. So the podcast is quick aside. I was initially just going to be like a joke. Like I wanted to have it be just like a series of bits, basically, skits that was like Bitcoin podcasters talking about Bitcoin podcasting, like some, really meta satire. And then I just decided, well, maybe I should just like actually just make a podcast and have it be somewhat serious, not entirely, but somewhat. But yeah, the first time meeting Foss was great, and I love that guy. I have so much respect for him. we had these conjoining rooms. He like knew of us already, which was very flattering. He'd seen some of the videos, and I remember he like took it upon himself. We met him downstairs later. Like we didn't, go knock on his door and like, hello, Mr. Foss. But met him downstairs later, and he starts, chatting us up, and we're actually in the room right next door. He's like, hey, you wanna? I got some beers in my room. Like, you wanna go have some? Hey, and we're like, yeah, I want to go have beers in your room with you, Greg Foss. I've got beers in my room. Like he had Bud Light, I had Miller Lite, so I won't hold that against him. He's Canadian. It's not his fault. But he's like, oh, Lavish is coming up too. I'm like, wow, James Lavish too. Like, wow, this is neat. And just started hanging out with those guys. And I got to give it up to Foss because he really took it upon himself to just introduce us to like absolutely everybody he possibly could, which says a lot about somebody when they just kind of open up their network to you. And yeah, through that, it was like, oh, we're got to meet Natalie Brunel, who is one of our dear friends now. We're at her wedding with Sam Callahan. Like that's incredible that you can go from making comedic videos about magic internet money to meeting some of the most influential people in the space, to emceeing events, to then becoming such good friends with these people that you end up at their weddings watching them say their vows with the person they're going to spend the rest of their life with. That's an incredible thing. And I think it's just sounds cheesy, but Bitcoin brings people together. And I think where we're at right now in the cycle, it attracts such a high quality of curious, freedom loving individuals that you're going to meet people that you're going to be friends with for life. And that's such a powerful thing. And, it's not always going to be this way. Like we're still at the innovators phase, maybe, not even the early adopters phase. Maybe it's just going to be like I was talking with Svetsky the other day, and he's like, when, the point of the money is to forget about the money, fix it so you forget about it. When it's like the air we breathe, we don't need to think about it. But right now we do need to think about it because the money is still fundamentally broken. We that are in Bitcoin now see it as an opportunity, and we're trying to educate as many people as possible about it. So I think that just naturally attracts a really high caliber of person who is extremely interested in seeking truth, in trying to make connections, and trying to do something that is going to better the world. And I know I sound like Miss America here, like I just want world peace, but it's like really, you go around the event and you talk to these toxic Bitcoiners, and the first thing you realize is, wow, everybody cares a lot. Like Bitcoin doesn't care, but Bitcoiners really care. They care very deeply, and they want to see a change in the world that they know is possible thanks to Bitcoin. And so, yeah, if you haven't been to a conference and you're listening to this, I mean, go to the Bitcoin conference in Vegas. Super stoked that's in Vegas, by the way. Carl and I love Vegas, not just for the casinos, but also the natural beauty that surrounds it. Great hikes out there. But there's nothing better if you've never been to a Bitcoin conference than walking around, getting to meet people that you've maybe only seen online before, but you feel like you kind of know them because, you've been in each other's Twitter DMs, or, you've been retweeting each other and replying for a while. You meet them in person. It's a whole different experience. And it really just, I can't go to a conference and not walk away more bullish on Bitcoin, but more so on Bitcoiners, on humanity in general.
Going back to you can just do things. And you made a comment earlier about the irony of Bitcoiners and podcasters and how you originally uh, started doing your podcast as kind of like a meta joke, right? Because I think it was around like, you said you started 18 months ago. So like 2020, 2021, 2022,
It
like you
was like
said.
2023, maybe like August is when I first started recording the podcast. So we'd been doing like the skits for a
Yeah.
couple of years at that point.
Gotcha. Okay. Good context. So even still, like 2023, you said this earlier. If you're not a coder, you were doing a podcast or doing something to build community. Um, And it was a really interesting time in that last epoch from 2021 to 2024 where it really, and this might be wrong, but it really did feel like that was like the last kind of not mainstream Bitcoin culture in the sense that like you could go to these events, you could meet everyone, and that's still the case for us going on. But I think for anybody new to Bitcoin who's like actually looking into it because institutions are buying it, because the government has accepted it as part of like a strategic reserve plan or into their sovereign wealth fund. The community aspect is much bigger and therefore harder to get into, so to say. Not to discourage anyone from getting from going to events and that sort of thing, but I think we really were in a novel time. Um, and yeah, I mean, I share the same sentiments with you. I've had the privilege of organizing a lot of our own Bitcoin conferences. I've gone to other conferences that have been organized. I mean, heck, you and I, like I said earlier, we met finally at Sailor's Party. But it's the same circles that we've been able to run into. And to your point, right? I think a lot of things that bring people into Bitcoin originally is price. Then you start investigating it and realizing that it's like, no, Bitcoin's a tool that has been created because the current monetary financial system is broken. Um, and then that leads to this cult mentality. I mean, we're talking here. I'm super passionate about Bitcoin. You love Bitcoin. We love the things that it does to impact the day to day lives, such as lowering your time preference, making decisions for the long term, focusing on health, and all the byproducts that come with a sound money. But you say all that, and you sound like to someone on the outside looking in, it's like, oh, this is a cult, but the best cult in certain ways. Um, but yeah, tell me about a little bit. So you start going to these events, you're emceeing these events, you start your podcast. Greg opens up his network to all these amazing people. What is that experience like for you? And how does that influence the way you're carrying your shows and the topics that you like to cover with Bitcoin?
I don't think we could have gone about it a better way. And this wasn't because we did this on purpose. Like we were just literally making videos in the middle of nowhere, Wisconsin, and this stuff kind of happened. But like, it felt like very lucky. But again, not to sound cheesy, but luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity, right? We had prepared ourselves by just putting in the work and putting in the time and creating the videos and studying Bitcoin to the point where you actually know what you're talking about, because Bitcoiners can smell bullshit. But it was actually a very easy thing for me to be able to start the podcast, because I already knew all of the people that I would want to talk to right off the bat. I had the privilege of knowing them personally. So it's like, it wasn't like I had to go, beg people to come on the show. It was like, you know, very, and I'm so grateful to them, but I could just like text, Jeff Booth and Preston Pish and be like, would you guys be like two of my first episodes? I'd be really honored, and both said yes. And, like, shout out to those guys. They're just, great guys who are willing to do that. And same thing, with like Samson Moe or other, BDC sessions, people who, Natalie Brunell, who are big in the space. Those were all some of my first episodes. And the fact that I was able to just reach out to them made that a lot easier. Not to discourage anyone from starting a podcast, because those people are all very gracious with their time. And even though they know how scarce their time is because they're Bitcoiners. But it was a fun journey. And, I wanted to just go back a little bit to the cult thing, if I can, because I think this is something that I totally agree. People looking from the outside, they hear you talking about time preference and, absolute, provable, verifiable, auditable, digital scarcity, and all these things. And, the feeling and the community of these Bitcoiners and the ethos that Bitcoin may imbue in you. It's like, you guys are definitely in a cult. But then you think about it and you're like, if it's okay, if Bitcoin is a cult, it's a pretty weird cult. Like, what do cults have? Cults always have centralization and a figurehead, a leader, usually a very flamboyant, gregarious, enigmatic leader who was probably sleeping with half the cult. Like, I think that's the reason most people start cults, is just to, have a lot of gangbangs. Let's be honest.
The Dave
So
Koreshes of the world and such.
yes, so far in Bitcoin, thankfully, haven't been exposed to that. Probably going on somewhere, but for the most part, Bitcoiners are a little more family focused than they are strange, cultish, sexual experience focused. So, okay, weird from that perspective for Bitcoin, because there is no leader. There's nobody in charge. There is no figurehead. There is no CEO. There's no, I'm the top tuna here. And then the other thing that cults always have is required conformity. Usually they're all wearing white or some shade of green or some sort of thing to signify that they're in the in group. Now, sure, we see a lot of Bitcoiners wearing Bitcoin logos, wearing orange, but conformity is not something that you would ever associate with Bitcoiners. Quite the opposite, in fact. And that's one of the things I love about Bitcoiners so much is that it's true diversity, not like the forced DEI diversity, but real diversity, people from all over the world, all different backgrounds who have coalesced around an idea, around this protocol. And so, you don't have a leader, you don't have forced conformity. You've got literally the antithesis of both those things. So if Bitcoin is a cult, it is the only one like it to ever have existed. And it's a kind of a pretty bad cult, really. Like we're not following any of the cult rules. But yeah, wanted to throw that out there because I always think it's so funny when you see people online being like these, cultish Bitcoin bros. And I'm like, first of all, please don't be sexist. There are women in Bitcoin. So Bitcoin bros is a bit, gender exclusionary. And I don't think you
How
should be doing
progressive of
that
you.
as a nice woke NPC. You should try to be more progressive.
It's we're the perfect embodiment of anarcho capitalism and cultish like behavior. Maybe that's a better way
Yeah.
to put it.
Cult-ish. Yeah, cult-ish is fair, I think.
And so, we're talking about some of these cult-ish behaviors. I think one of the things that sets your show apart from a lot of the other crypto shows out there, and that maybe I should back up a little bit. The weird thing about like Bitcoin and Bitcoin maximalism is that it's a subculture of crypto that the general public lumps us in with these like crypto bros. And you have all these Bitcoin guys saying, Bitcoin, not crypto, we're nothing like them, like totally different value set and that sort of thing, which I always just find funny. And that's a total aside. But your show, right? I think one of the things that sets it apart as a whole is that A, you're very genuine in the way that you talk. Um, you don't approach these conversations in a way that would maybe from the outside looking in, it'd feed into like traditional maxi tropes, like super toxic, like not non-conforming, argumentative, and that sort of thing. It's more invitive, exploring ideas. What a actual, toxic Bitcoin maximalist is, right? Um, what kind of shaped who were kind of some of the key thought leaders that shaped up that mentality, and why do you think why do you think toxic Bitcoin maximalism is an important part of Bitcoin's ethos and the culture at large?
It's a great question. I mean, the people who I look up to and have kind of I guess helped inform and shape my view of this are perhaps too numerous to mention because I think that we digest a little bit from everyone, right, and try to take the best parts of it, but then figure out what you yourself as an individual, as a free thinking human, are going to actually believe because it's not going to be exactly what somebody else does. You're going to, even with the people you agree with most, you're going to disagree on some things. And that's great. Like, again, if we all agreed on everything, well, then we'd just be NPCs, right? Just going about our programmed rituals. But a couple of people that really come to mind, Jeff Booth is one who I admire greatly and who I think does an excellent job. First of all, his book, The Price of Tomorrow, for anyone who hasn't read it, is outstanding. And it was a part of my Bitcoin journey where like things started to click in a different way. Hearing the idea that technology is naturally deflationary, I was like, that is so simple. Why didn't I think of that? And it's like, because Jeff said it that way, because until somebody says it in that specific way, it's not going to click. But one thing I respect about him too is that he is hardcore Bitcoin only, focused entirely on Bitcoin in his career now, but he always leads with empathy. And I think that that's something that's often difficult to do, especially when you see all of the absolutely idiotic takes out there. Another person is Preston Pish, who, he's excuse me, he's an ex-military guy. Like he served this country, and now he's associating with and has one of the biggest voices in this space that has traditionally had a very anti-government bent. And he's somebody who has seen how the sausage is made, and seeing people like that. And again, I too numerous to mention the folks, But I think for me, it's like toxic maximalism is so damn important because it is a way of having an immune response to all of the garbage that tries to be associated with Bitcoin. Like toxic maximalism comes from a place of love, ultimately. It comes from a place of empathy. It comes from a place of, I've probably been screwed by trying to mess around with shitcoins at some point in my Bitcoin journey. I don't want that for you, pre-coiner. I would love if you could skip that phase because it is only going to bring you some pain, decrease the amount of Bitcoin that you could have had. And I've made these mistakes. So why am I toxic? It is because I know what you're about to do and it's not going to go how you think it is. And I think that it's a, people talk about purity tests and, like maxi purity tests and stuff like that. And for me, it's like being a toxic maximalist is just about focusing only on Bitcoin, ignoring the rest of crypto, trying to do your best to repeatedly remind people that yes, while Bitcoin is cryptocurrency, in fact, it's the original and really the only true cryptocurrency, it is not, quote, crypto. And we may seem like we're beating a dead horse with that sometimes, where it's like, okay, guys, don't you think people get it? But the answer is obviously no, because even, prior to the executive order, you see somebody like Trump who's posting on Truth Social about, we're going to have XRP and ADA and SOL in our strategic asset stockpile. Half hour later, somebody on his team got to him clearly, and he's like, oh, and Bitcoin and Ether. I love Bitcoin and Ethereum. And it's like, okay, now the executive order is something completely different, and we can get into that later, like completely demarcated. But the point is that what happened, what did you see on social media after that came out? The initial post? You saw all these toxic Bitcoin maximalists rising up. That immune response was stimulated and doing our best to shout from the mountaintops that, look, these are not the same thing. To put them in the same category reveals a lack of understanding or potential bad intentions. Now, that's what, like, again, when I said that toxic maximalism comes from a place of love, it comes from not wanting to see people get screwed over. And by like all of these shitcoins are closer to fiat than they are to Bitcoin. They have centralized issuers, they have insiders, they have outsiders, which is 99% of people. Bitcoin has no insiders, Bitcoin has no outsiders. Bitcoin is a protocol, and it is the only one that is truly tied to the real world. And so I think it's like we maximalists need to continue beating that drum that, look, I think everybody is free to buy whatever they want. You want a shitcoin, you want to trade, be my guest. I don't care what you do. It's none of my business. But when you start promoting that to other people, when you start trying to bring other people in on this grift, other people who I know are going to get rugged by you, shitcoin influencer, who just already got a bunch of whatever the new soul token du jour happens to be deposited straight to your wallet. And now you're going out and shilling this just so you can dump it soon, Dave Portnoy. Like, I find that to be morally like reprehensible, but like morals aside, it's just a shitty thing to do to people. Like it's a negative sum game. It's a, yeah, there's a positive for you, but only because you're extracting from others. And I think that's why Bitcoiners feel so empowered to talk about Bitcoin only, because you know that your mom, your dad, your sister, brother, cousins, friends, strangers on the internet, them stacking a little bit of Bitcoin, them setting up a DCA, that's not pumping your bags. Like that is a tiny drop in a vast ocean of capital that is coming into Bitcoin. You're not promoting Bitcoin because you want to pump your own bags by another person buying, because you're not planning on selling, right? So you're promoting Bitcoin because you're doing it from a place of love. You're doing it because you want people to see the change that is happening. You want them to see that there is a phase shift happening, an inflection point that we are at right now. And if you manage to, buy Bitcoin before the US government starts buying Bitcoin, that's fantastic. And you will be much better off in the long run. You'll still be okay if you start buying after, but you'll be a lot more okay if you start buying before. And so that's a long roundabout way of saying toxic maximalists are toxic because we care.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you're a father. I'm a father. It's almost like all the hardened Bitcoin maxis are trying to nurture their child along this journey of financial education into Austrian economics. I guess to give anybody in the audience who may not be familiar with some of the history of Bitcoin maximalism, maybe a quick speed run of the timeline. So when I got into Bitcoin in 2017, the concept of like Bitcoin only was kind of just starting to emerge. Like I remember getting onto crypto Twitter, Bitcoin Twitter was kind of like a small subsect. There was like the Reddit page r/Bitcoin. But the main thing everybody always asked was like, did you read this white paper? Did you read that white paper? And it was almost like a game of seeing who could have like the thickest book of a protocol layer, with the false presumption that the bigger the technicals and the white paper, the more valuable the coin is. Whereas like Bitcoin, 2 pages. It's all it is. Um, and at that same time, right, there's this entire conversation around the programmability of Bitcoin. So we had the block size wars. We had Roger Ver and crew trying to push the fork of Bitcoin Cash to up the block size. And that created a whole civil war. And we obviously, what, Bitcoin is today, was able to, maintain the forces of change that were trying to change the base protocol layer. And the people who went over to Bitcoin Cash, I mean, just look at the price. It's not doing very well today. So I think that was like the very first cream of the crop of toxic Bitcoin maxis that emerged. It still wasn't labeled at that time, but then 2020 rolls around, COVID rolls around. And again, the 4-year cycle dynamics are starting to prop up the price again. We start hitting this euphoria, and Ethereum and Solana, and Bitcoin yield starts becoming a thing, lending your Bitcoin on these lending platforms, and they're trying to get you into their other tokens, right? Svetsky at that time, I think I might be incorrect here, but I believe he was the original purveyor of toxic Bitcoin maximalism as a concept. Start speaking out against the Celsiuses, the BlockFis, the FTX, like all the shit coins that are in the space. And, obviously FTX blew up. Sam Bankman Fried went to jail. That hardened another class of toxic Bitcoin maximalists that got burnt, shit coining and trying to game the fiat system to gain more fiat, not more Bitcoin, although some probably did it the other way around too. But ultimately, most people have lost. And we get through that. We go through another bear market. And then all of a sudden, these governments start talking about Bitcoin. And we're like, oh my gosh, we're going to have to do this conversation again for a third time. Like, please, please, please listen to us. The previous administration, Biden's administration, doesn't understand crypto. They're actually like just trying to suppress it. Senator Warren's doing her Operation Choke Point 2.0. We have Trump on the campaign trail again. I think it was at the Libertarian Convention in early 2024 when he first kind of came out in stance of being pro Bitcoin. He only mentioned Bitcoin. And that got a lot of people's attention. He was like, oh, this is a whole voter block that I need to capture. And then he comes to Bitcoin 2024, talks about Bitcoin, backs up, the announcement from RFK the day prior that he wants to also do a strategic Bitcoin reserve. And things are looking great. But the Bitcoiners in the back of our mind are like, don't trust politicians. The rug pull is going to come. And then lo and behold, David Sachs, the guy who loves Sol, comes in as the crypto czar. They talk about putting in Ethereum, Solana, Cardano, all the shit coins into the reserve. New Year rolls around. We get Trump coin, right? In Argentina, we have Javier Milei launching Libra token. We have Hawk Tua Girl launching a token. This entire thing that we've been preaching against just blows up massively in our face. I wouldn't say blows up, but it's just like, oh my God. Not only is the government speedrunning shitcoin for the entire US populace, but so is Argentina. So are all of these other countries. Where does it end? Right. I think there's some hope, right? And it's a long-winded way of going through the history, but we had the executive order come out yesterday. thank God it was Bitcoin only, but all these shit coins are still around. Um, we had, I think it was Musk who was on Rogan recently, where Rogan straight up asked Musk, he's like, why is it legal to rug pull people with these shitcoin tokens? And even Musk tried to dance around the question. So, a long-winded way to say we have the executive order. It is Bitcoin only, but shitcoins are still a thing. They're not illegal. Where are we going with this? What happens in the next 6 months?
Well, 2 points of information. I believe the first person to say Bitcoin maximalism was actually Vitalik. Svetsky may have added the toxic, but I believe Vitalik was the one who said Bitcoin maximalism. And like Bitcoiners do, you call us psychopaths or whatever it may be, we're going to just adopt that as a moniker ourselves. So keep doing that, Bitcoiners. The other regarding the strategic reserve, it did come alongside the digital asset stockpile in that executive order. Now, the important thing I think to clarify there, and where you saw some of that Bitcoin maximalism bleeding into even that EO, was that the strategic Bitcoin reserve can be added to. You can acquire more Bitcoin through budget neutral means, right? So, as in something that is not going to cost the taxpayers extra money. They also specifically said, we're not going to sell anything from this strategic Bitcoin reserve. So, accumulate more Bitcoin when you figure out how to in budget neutral ways. Don't sell any of the Bitcoin we have. Great. Digital asset stockpile, exact opposite thing. The only way it can be added to is if there are confiscations, forfeitures, whatever, the ways that they've acquired Bitcoin to date. No buying, crypto in budget neutral ways. Don't buy any at all. If we get some more because, another FTX blows up, there's another Bitfinex hack, whatever, uh, we'll put it in that stockpile. But they also clarified that they will sell from that stockpile if they need to. So while you still have crypto in that EO, at least there was a clear demarcation of the two. Bitcoin and crypto are separate in the light of that executive order, as it should be. And what I thought was interesting about this, in terms of kind of where we go, is that the response to that those Trump Truth Social posts, the initial ones where he first mentions Sol, ADA, XRP, and then later mentions Bitcoin and Ethereum, you had people who, like Brian Armstrong, as an example, who literally runs a shitcoin casino, Coinbase. Like, they make their money by listing every freaking one of thousands of these new shitcoins that comes on the market. He came out and said, if we're going to have a strategic reserve, it should be Bitcoin only. You saw this from a ton of people who are not Bitcoin only in their business or in their, what they usually talk about, but they were Bitcoin only in this sense. And I thought that that was really interesting. Whether or not this was some, 6D chess that Trump was playing, where, he's secretly the most hardcore Bitcoin maximalist. And this was his way of actually getting people to agree with. I don't really think that's the case. I think he's got a lot of stuff on his plate because he's the president of the United States of America. And he's, working on the advice of his advisors, which is the whole point of them. The president can't pay attention to everything. If he did, he would not get much done. So clearly, there are some people who have been in his ear that maybe he fired off a couple of posts and they came and said, look, fine, Mr. President, but these two things, we need to make sure they're separate. And that's what we saw in the executive order. So where do we go from here? I think that the crypto world will continue to lose dominance to Bitcoin, even as the number of crypto tokens that exist expands exponentially, as it has been doing. Within the crypto world, I think you'll probably see Solana flip Ethereum, and then maybe one of the other tokens down the line flip Solana. And I think that they're all going to be in a race to the bottom because there is no scarcity in the crypto world. There are always new tokens. And the thing about this degenerate, shitcoin casino is that everybody is always chasing the next one. It used to be even I wasn't here very early, even since 2020, it used to be, well, this is Solana's faster than Bitcoin. ETH is more programmable than Bitcoin. This is like Bitcoin, but it's better. That was always the crypto angle was, we built a better Bitcoin. Like you said, look at our thick white paper. Now they don't even bother with white papers. It's just full out in the open, degenerate gambling, and everyone admits it. But they're no longer giving that message of we're a better Bitcoin. It's even the crypto world is kind of realizing, okay, we can't touch Bitcoin. Bitcoin's the king. We're not getting anywhere close to that. So we're in a fight with each other. And ultimately, that fight is a race to the bottom when measured in Bitcoin. Could you, savvy, genius, gigabrain trader, make some quick gains? Maybe if you get some insider info and get airdropped some tokens before they launch on the public exchanges? Sure. Are you probably going to end up losing money in Bitcoin terms in the long run? 99.9% chance, yes. Like, you're not a good trader, bro. And like, maybe you got lucky a couple of times. You are much better off trying to create value for this world, saving in Bitcoin, the hardest money ever to have existed, and going about your life. Like, shitcoins are a negative sum game, and Bitcoin is a positive sum game. Bitcoin is the rising tide that lifts all boats. Shitcoins are, I don't know, like walking around your boat with a shotgun and just shooting holes in the floor and being like, let's see how fast we sink, guys. Like, it's happening. They are sinking. They will continue losing dominance to Bitcoin even as their number grows, and they will continue flip-flopping each other for within the crypto space dominance. So next 6 months, I don't know. No crystal ball over here, but next 4 years, next 10 years, I don't think we're going to get rid of degenerate gambling. If we could, there wouldn't be a Las Vegas or massive online sports betting industry or horse racing or whatever else. Like, degenerate gambling will always be there. But I think that when the money is broken, as ours is now, people are much more incentivized to become degenerate gamblers. And we see this throughout, it's the societal decay that you see whenever there is a money that is failing. And so I think we're going to, the degenerate gambling will continue until the money improves. And the nice thing is that right now, you don't have to wait for that. The improved money already exists. It's Bitcoin. You just have to set aside your ego, realize that you're not a good trader. You are a gambler and you have a problem gambling on shitcoins. Put that aside, study Bitcoin, set up a little DCA, forget about it, spend time with your family, build a life, build value, and try to just not be a complete degenerate for a little while. And you'll be amazed at how your life improves and how you don't, have all of this anxiety and depression that you previously had, and that you'll look at every Bitcoin dip as an opportunity for buying versus wondering why your, I don't know, like spicy dog taco token is down 80% and Bitcoin's only down 1%. Like, yeah, there is no second best, right? And more people will start to realize that.
Yeah. No, there is no second best. That's for sure. It's funny. I bet somebody has done this. I haven't seen this chart, but if you were to line up the expansion of the shitcoin supply to the expansion of the dollar, the king of all the shitcoins, they probably mirror each other 1 to 1, or at least pretty close. Because I think from all the shitcoins, we're over at like 100,000 different tokens or something. I don't know. I hardly pay attention nowadays. Um, but yeah, it's an evolution of the lottery system. I mean, it's really sad to see, like, yeah, you have guys out there that are playing in the casino for fun. They lose some money, yeah, whatever. But there's a lot of people in desperation because the money is so broken that they don't have the day-to-day expenses, even if it seems like a minuscule amount to some other people, to be playing that game. And so my word of encouragement, right, always is like, hey, don't look at the price of Ethereum in dollars. Price it against Bitcoin, and you can see that chart only goes one way. It goes down. And yeah, you might want to flip that $10 tonight into $100, but I promise you that $10 invested today in Bitcoin will be $100,000 in like 10 years time. So that's, I think, the biggest thing. But I want to circle back to the biggest shitcoin of all, fiat, the US
Okay.
dollar. You and I were talking earlier before the show. You just finished narrating Lawrence Lepard's book, The Big Print. And I'm sure in reading that book, you picked up on a lot of great things. I know Larry threw like every chart that he could into the book. It was really geared not being like you don't have to be an investment guru or, a traditional finance guy to understand the book. He really wrote it for the common man to help people understand how broken the money is. Um, so you narrated this book. What are some of your big takeaways from it?
There's a lot. First of all, it is a great book. I'm very honored that Larry thought of me to narrate this, and yeah, the narration is done. I'm now in the editing phase. I know people have been waiting for it. Thank you for your patience. And it turns out it takes a long time to get through 350 pages and then go through and edit all of that. But the, I mean, there's a lot of takeaways here. But what I love about it is, as you said, this is something that's accessible for people. Like can be a starting point on your Bitcoin journey, I think, because it walks you through what the problem is. And I think so many people, and this is one thing Larry calls out multiple times in the big print, so many people realize something is wrong. They feel that something is wrong. They realize that it doesn't make any sense that things just keep getting more and more and more expensive forever, even though technology keeps improving and improving. And that goes back to the Jeff Booth thesis of, technology is deflationary. Why isn't stuff getting cheaper? And then they make it a red team thing, a blue team thing, as Larry says, but it's not a political thing. It's a sound money thing. It's a broken money thing. And I think that once people get to that realization, Bitcoin becomes so much more obvious, because once you realize, like, all of these problems that we see are more so symptoms, right? They're not the actual disease. The problems that that the red team fights about against the blue team for, these aren't the disease. You're fighting each other about a symptom that you're not actually going to change through, let's say, political partisan means. What's going to change it is fixing the money, which is upstream of that problem. And once you realize that, I think it gives you a lot more capacity to have empathy for people with different political views than you, because you realize that you're both mad about the same problems. You're just blaming the problem on each other instead of looking to, the Federal Reserve and the the elitist bankers who run it, that cartel of private banks. You're mad at the wrong people, but that's exactly what they want. And so I think one of the biggest takeaways from this is that we have an opportunity right now in the year 2025. We've just seen the President of the United States of America, again, sign an executive order establishing a strategic Bitcoin reserve. It may feel like because that has happened, you are late, but we are still so early. We are like a fraction of 1% of the world that are actually Bitcoin holders in any meaningful way. It's tiny. And when you read the big print, you realize these monetary shenanigans, these financial manipulations, they get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think that's going to be one of the things that people really take away from this book is, the big print, as it's aptly titled, perfect title, that is coming next is going to be the biggest one yet. And what has happened in each of these last printing episodes? Well, they have created a ton of dollar liquidity out of thin air. They have injected it into the economy from the top down, and it trickles down to you. It's trickle down, not trickle down economics, but trickle down monetary theory. This is the Cantillon effect, right? The bankers get the money first, you get the money last. Their assets go up. You are saddled with increased prices for consumer goods. So you have an opportunity now to study Bitcoin. A great way is through the big print, the book, or the audiobook, and take an actual meaningful step for you and your family to protect yourself for what is coming, because they will print again. We've been in kind of a lull of decreasing, global liquidity since kind of, 2022. It's basically been just kind of looping down. It's starting to tick back up again. And if you look at the printing that they did in 2008, it was really, really big at the time, the biggest ever. You compare that to COVID, it looks like a, just like a baby's print. Like it's nothing, right? The next big print is going to make COVID look like just a blip, right? And I don't think people are prepared for that. But if to show Larry's book again, if you read the big print or listen to the audiobook, you will be prepared for that. And I think the conclusion that people come away with is there is no other asset that is going to protect you from what is coming better than Bitcoin. You can try to play fiat games, but if you play fiat games, you win fiat prizes. The only chance that you have of making a meaningful difference, not just for next month or next year, but for the next 10 years, for the next 50 years, for yourself, for your family, for your friends, for your community, is to buy and hold Bitcoin. And if you do that, life is going to get easier. If you don't do that, life is going to get harder. So the choice is yours to make. But once you realize how broken the system is and what is coming next, the choice becomes very clear, in my opinion.
Walker, we've covered a lot of ground here today. I think that's what we're going to end it on. Any final words
Perfect.
for the audience, and where can people find you?
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for having me. This was a great chat. Final words. I would just say read Larry's book, The Big Print. The audiobook is coming out soon. Hope to have the editing done by the end of this week. Actually, a couple more late nights should get it done. But pick up a physical copy as well. Give it to a friend or a family member. If you're a Bitcoiner and you've already read this, like it's a nice thing to be able to give somebody a little bit of knowledge that can maybe they can pick it up, maybe they won't, but it's a nice gift to be able to give to help somebody realize that Bitcoin's the answer. Where people can find me, I'm on X at Walker America. I'm on Noster at primal.net/Walker. You can search for the Bitcoin Podcast in any of your podcasting apps, or just go to bitcoinpodcast.net and all the links are there. And yeah, I guess the one thing I would leave people with is ignore shitcoins, study Bitcoin, try to create value, and remember that if you're looking for ways to create value, you can just do things. You can start a podcast. You can learn to code, but starting a podcast is much easier. And I think until we have more Bitcoin podcasts than Finance Bro podcasts, we don't have enough Bitcoin podcasts. So there's plenty of room, guys. We're early. We still need to orange pill 99.5% of the world. So see what you can do to play your small part in it, and never know what might happen.
Walker, it's been an absolute pleasure. Looking forward to seeing you at Bitcoin 2025. Catch
Can't
you on the next
wait.
time.
See ya.